Several years ago, I discovered a great new way to write user stories. It still follows the fundamental principles, but it really helps the development team in an agile environment to really focus on what's best for making the product successful. In this video, I'm going to introduce the basics of user stories and tell you about this new technique, which is actually quite simple, but is a little bit mind-bending for a lot of people. So here we go. We're going to talk about the basics. We're going to look at something called the 3 C's of user stories. We're going to look at the common template that you probably have seen before. We'll talk as a brief sidebar about business metrics, and then we'll talk about the recommended new template that I think everyone should learn. Now, let's look at some basics about user stories. And this is really just a kind of quick list of some things that user stories are and are not. So user stories are, of course, a way of describing your product and specifically about the future of your product, what your product will be able to do, what features and functions it will have. User stories are meant to be very simple and informal. They are short. They are designed to be something that people can easily understand. One of the nicest way of describing user stories is that each user story is an invitation to a conversation. And that conversation is between you and the product owner, you as the product owner, and your developers. It is a conversation about what the team needs to implement in order to make your product a success. User stories usually describe some piece of functionality, a feature, maybe a problem that needs to be solved for the user or the customer. Also, user stories are almost always focused on customer and user needs, either directly or indirectly. Now, what are some things user stories are not? Well, they're not formal requirements or specifications. A user story is not detailed enough. It's not about any technology or implementation details. It's not meant to be a permanent reference for audit purposes 5 years in the future. It's not designed to be traceable. It is also not a record of decisions already made. Finally, and this is really important, user stories are never signed off. They're not immutable. They're not unchangeable. They are deliberately something that could change in the future. We have 3 C's that we need to think about for user stories. First of all, user stories are written on a card. Now, physical or virtual doesn't matter that much, but the point of the idea is that a card is a limited amount of space. And so you can't just write a huge novel for a user story. It's meant to be brief. Maybe 1 tweet's worth of text, for example. Second C, cards are about conversations. As I mentioned, they're an invitation to a conversation. And in particular, the conversation between stakeholders, users, customers, you as a product owner, and your team or teams, it's an ongoing conversation. And the card is not meant to be a record of that conversation, except maybe some very, very high-level details. You might put some bullets on a user story card, or you might draw a very quick diagram on a user story card. But just in general, it's meant to be super simple and lightweight. And then the third C is that every user story needs some sort of confirmation. Now, the confirmation in a user story is designed to be automated. It's like a set of acceptance criteria, which you've probably heard of, except that it's created as automated tests, and that you have completed the user story, you've confirmed that it's done when those automated tests pass. So you're probably already very familiar with it. You stick in a user role, some sort of feature or function, and then a benefit or an outcome. So as a job seeker, I want my resume to be online so that hiring managers can find me. Okay, Fairly straightforward. As a user role, I want a feature or function so that I get some sort of benefit or outcome. And it's all focused on the user, which is fine. But there's one thing about this that's missing. This doesn't give any indication of the importance of this for your business. As a product owner, you are working to make business decisions to maximize business results. What are those business results? Well, those are business results about the success of your product in the marketplace. When you're looking at your product and measuring success for your product, what you're mostly concerned about are things like money, competition, and users or customers. And so return on investment, market share, customer satisfaction. You can also sometimes measure success by the benefits that a customer receives if you can measure those. So sometimes, for example, maybe you're building a system that saves users time, and you can actually measure how much time they're saving. So that might be an indicator of product success as well. This is the business user story template. Now, the idea starts the same. You identify a user, a job seeker, for example, and we tweak that a little bit to, instead of to say what they want, it's about what they can do, how they interact with your product. So as a job seeker, I can upload my resume, period. Okay, now here's where it gets different. Now we switch to the product owner speaking, and we say, that way our ROI improves. In other words, we talk about a business metric. Because when we are talking to our development team, the developers are going to be able to make trade-off decisions that are appropriate for the business, not just appropriate for the users. Now, this can be very powerful, and it takes a little bit of practice to get used to.